Thank you for joining this week's episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the basement every week challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Samantha Carter
and Sarah Jones.
We hope you'll continue to follow us as we put out new episodes every Monday. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you have a story that's creepy in nature, unexplained, or mysterious, there are a couple ways to contact us. You can send us an email at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com or shoot us a message on our Facebook page. And now we have a fancy new voicemail system where you can leave us a message and we can contact you back. You can do this by calling 641-812-2635. Just give us a general idea of your story, leave your name and whichever contact info you want, and your story could likely be in a future episode. There's also just the general contact us form on our website as well at www.bigfootforbreakfast.com.
Also, this is the last episode before our contest closes. If you want to be entered into a drawing in which you could win a fabulous new insulated Bigfoot for Breakfast mug and a t-shirt, you have to do the things. And the things are, go to your iTunes or Google Play app and leave us a rating and a review. Then go to our Facebook page and there you'll find a post at the top regarding the contest. Simply comment the username that you left the review under. This will let us know who you are if you win, because if we don't know you, it's hard to track a person down using only a username.
And then, on the very night of All Hallows Eve, when the moon is high above the trees and the wind is singing the songs of the dead, otherwise known as 9 p.m., we will reach into the conjure basket and draw the name of the fortuitous creature who will fulfill the prophecy by winning a t-shirt and a cup. Today's episode is covering a subject that I happened to stumble upon when I passed a spray-painted billboard on the interstate in Tennessee a couple years back. Of course, I couldn't help but deviate from my planned course of travel and check out the legends of and the structures haunted by, drumroll please, the Bell Witch. The Bell Witch, according to legends, was a sinister entity which is said to have haunted a pioneer family, the Bells, on the Tennessee frontier between the years of 1817 and 1821, according to www.bellwitch.org. For those of you who happen to enjoy exploring both haunted houses and caves, I would absolutely tell you it is worth a visit. The stories are a lot cooler coming from a tour guide when you're actually standing on the grounds where the haunting occurred.
This is a legend that has been passed from generation to generation for 200 years. The year was 1804 when John Bell moved his family from his home state of North Carolina, where he apprenticed as a barrel maker, to Red River, Tennessee, where he became a farmer. The move came from the influence of many friends and a few years of failed crops. John Bell, his wife Lucy, and children, Jesse, John Jr., Esther, Drury, and Benjamin, made the treacherous journey westward, where their farming endeavors proved to be much more successful. John Bell purchased the large house for his family, as well as some land, the span of which increased to 328 acres, which were cleared as fields for planting. Here, he was also an elder of the Red River Baptist Church. The Bells had 3 more children after moving to Tennessee: Elizabeth, otherwise known as Betsy, Richard, and then Joel. Their lives in the West could be described as successful, but in 1817, things took a strange turn for the Bell family.
But of course it did. We wouldn't have a show if it didn't. Let's set the scene a little better here and talk a little more in depth about the Bell children. So the oldest child, Jesse, joined the Tennessee militia in 1814, and he fought in the battles of Horseshoe Bend and New Orleans under then General Andrew Jackson. He was married 3 years later to a reverend's daughter named Martha Gunn. John Jr. and Drury also joined the militia and fought alongside their older brother. The Bells' eldest daughter, Esther, also got married to Alex Porter in 1817. Zadok, who was 14 years old at the time that the haunting began, had no experiences with the witch on record. It's speculated that he may have attended a boarding school while training to be a lawyer. He died of fever at the age of 23. Richard was only 6 years old at the time, but remembered vividly his family's suffering and later documented it in a manuscript. Joel, the youngest of the siblings, was too young to remember any of the incidents, but grew up hearing tales from his mother and siblings. Elizabeth, also known as Betsy, is reported to have received the worst of the abuse and was slapped and pinched until her body was covered in bruises.
Let's go back to the story. It was summer of the year 1817, and things were going well for the Bell family after the move to Tennessee. But one morning, as John Bell was inspecting his cornfield, he happened upon a strange-looking animal sitting amongst the rows. The animal he saw was described as having the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Bell, obviously spooked by this terrifying creature, shot it several times before it just vanished. He was probably pretty perplexed by the incident, but then moved on as he had a lot to do on the farm. He gave it no more thought, at least not until after dinner. That evening, the Bells began hearing beating sounds on the outside walls of their log house, which continued each night with increased frequency and force. John Bell and the Bell sons would rush outside to catch the culprit, but they always returned empty-handed. Drury Bell was one of the first children to experience an apparition, which appeared in the form of a giant bird sitting on a fence by the road leading to their home. He shot the gun at the bird, and like the strange animal spotted by his father, it vanished without a trace. This incident occurred only a short time after his father's experience.
In the weeks that followed, the Bell children began waking up frightened. They were complaining to their parents that rats were gnawing at their bedposts, chains were being dragged through the house, and stones were being dropped on the floor. Not long after that, the children were complaining of having their bed covers pulled off of them and their pillows being tossed onto the floor by a seemingly invisible entity. The family kept these incidents to themselves for fear of the staunch Baptist community. Keep in mind that during this time, people were quick to blame black magic when things came up that they couldn't explain. The Bells likely didn't want to be accused of dabbling in witchcraft, especially since this label carried a huge persecutory burden. John was also an elder of his church, so he especially didn't want any trouble with this.
John Bell was very ill throughout the time period of the reported haunting. He experienced many different symptoms which were attributed to the spirit. These symptoms included periods in which he was unable to move his mouth or speak, and his tongue would swell. It was also reported that he had difficulty eating because swallowing was difficult, so he was likely losing a great deal of weight. John Bell also suffered episodes which could be classified as seizures. All of his symptoms at the time were attributed to the haunting. Betsy was also severely afflicted, more so than the other children. According to multiple cited works, she was slapped in the face until it was beet red. She would spend hours in a trance-like state and often complained that she was being poked with needles. She was also prone to fainting spells.
The Bell family suffered in silence for almost a year before deciding it was time to share their burden with a person outside of the household. The Bells confided in a man who they believed would be able to help them. He was well known as a devout Christian for being vigorous in prayer. He was considered by members of the church and community to be an expert on the subject of Christianity and the Bible, in spite of the fact that he was actually illiterate. This is according to his biography, which can be found at bellwitch.org. It was the hope of the Bell family that Mr. James Johnston, accompanied by his wife, may have the ability to exorcise the spirit and purge the evil presence from the house. They were neighbors to the Bells, and they were the first people outside of the family to encounter the witch. Mr. and Mrs. Johnston spent a few nights in the house and experienced many strange things. The first question Johnston skeptically asked of the entity was, "In the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want?" "My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." His initial impression apparently was that the whole ordeal was an elaborate hoax put on by the Bell children. It sounds as though he changed his mind after a few of his overnight visits to the home. At this point, Johnston made the conclusion that these strange occurrences should not be kept so secretive. The story of the Bell Witch spread, and people traveled from all over to give her an audience and continue to do so to this very day. While named the Bell Witch, it has been speculated that it could have been a form of a spirit or possibly a demon. There's really no way to know. James Johnston believed that the entity was in fact a demon or evil spirit, and stated that the Bible expresses the possibility of interactions with the supernatural.
The entity, who had now developed the ability to speak, had identified itself at one point as a Native American whose grave had been disrupted by the Bell Boys. But at another point, the entity identified itself as Kate Bass. This ended up being the identity that stuck. Mrs. Batts had been a neighbor of the Bells, and she and her family reportedly had some bad business dealings with John Bell. Spectre aside, Kate Batts had a few different stories floating around out there that kind of vary from source to source. In some sources, it was indicated that Kate Batts may have been a niece of John Bell's wife, Lucy. This speculation elaborates on the possibility that she's actually the daughter of Lucy's brother, John. Lucy's sister, Elizabeth Williams, was married to Jeremiah Batts. a brother to Kate's husband Frederick Batts. Yet another Batts brother, Benjamin, had a questionable business dealing with John Bell that resulted in John's excommunication from the church. So Lucy's sister Elizabeth was married to Jeremiah Batts. So Kate, her niece, correct?
Yes.
Was married to
his brother Frederick.
Okay, I guess they married
They married close. Yeah.
But they also married old guys would marry young girls.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I was trying to gather, if that is what I was getting.
So, to make that less confusing, Kate's uncle didn't get along with John Bell due to some bad business. They called John out on this, and he must have been proven to have been cheating them in some sort of way because John was cast out of the church because of this.
So this theory sets the scene for a perfect storm of circumstances that could create bad blood between the families and give Kate Batts a good reason to haunt and torment this family. This may explain why Lucy was left alone, even respected, having been described by the witch as the most perfect woman living. But the facts are, Kate was alive during this time period, which eliminates her as the culprit if it was in fact a ghost haunting. However, there were other theories to explore, and we will a little later on. But for now, we can also not neglect to mention that although she's rumored to enjoy being the center of attention, Kate Batts vehemently denies any involvement whatsoever.
So there was a reverend by the name of James Gunn who got involved in trying to figure out the haunting. He has been recognized as having garnered the alleged truth from the spirit when he asked it, "Who are you and what do you want?" "I am Inigo Montoya." No, I'm
Yeah.
The spirit replied to him, claiming the identity of Kate Batts, stating that her purpose was to torment old Jack Bell to his death. Jack was a nickname by which John Bell was known. Reverend Gunn was a pioneer of the Methodist Church in the area. He established and preached the word in different churches around Tennessee and South Kentucky. He was twice married in his life and fathered a grand total of 17 children.
Good Lord.
According to the legends, Reverend Gunn was visiting and trying to prove the existence of a supernatural entity. During the visit, the witch or spirit known as Kate provided a demonstration of her power. She recited, without flaw, the sermon of Reverend Gunn from earlier that day, as well as the sermon of another reverend who was preaching at a church 12 miles from the Methodist Church of Reverend Gunn on that very same day at the very same time. We always
are trying to other things.
I can't help it. I go Cockney.
Keep it under control.
The other reverend that the spirit Kate cited was Reverend Sugg Fort. Reverend Fort was the preacher of John's Baptist Church. He had maintained a good relationship with John Bell in spite of his excommunication from the church. Both Reverend Fort and Reverend Gunn got together with the Bell's neighbor James Johnston, who we mentioned earlier. They created a committee and were now in charge of investigating the strange case of the Bell Witch.
Unfortunately, these hauntings weren't strictly limited to the home or the farm grounds. According to Mothman and the Bell Witch, a documentary released in 2013, the children experienced some questionably supernatural activity while playing near a cave on the family land. The area actually has several caves, which are included in the tour of the historical site.
The caves were honestly my favorite part of the experience.
According to some of the locals, it was reported that while playing at the caves, the kids would be chased by an invisible force. It is also at the caves that Betsy apparently witnessed a girl in a green dress hanging from a tree. The girl was there 1 minute, and when Betsy looked back, she was gone.
Around this time, the Bells had a slave by the name of Dean. Dean had many strange encounters of his own, one of which detailed a 2-headed black dog that had followed him around. Dean's face was marked by a large scar which he attributed to an injury sustained from a large rabbit that he claimed was also the work of the old witch. Others speculate that it was the result of a beating by a local planter who had rented Dean from the Bells.
It's hard to even say that. The idea of renting and owning people is just insane. And I think most of us can agree that slavery is wrong, so we probably don't need to elaborate on why.
I suppose nobody but Dean really knows the truth. Dean had also been turned into a mule by Kate, who vowed to, quote, ride him to hell for breakfast.
That's some hardcore stuff right there.
There's no shortage of interesting stories stemming from the Bell Witch legend. That is for certain.
That's going to be my new tagline.
I'm going to ride you to hell for breakfast.
Yep. John Jr. is reported to have had no fear in the face of the witch. It is said that he was not shy to issue her a challenge or curse and yell at her. It seemed that his bravery toward her put him in high regard of the witch, as she would often refer to his intelligence and bestow upon him her respect. John Jr. discussed having very long and in-depth conversations with the witch, discussing world events and her prediction of said events, as well as engaging in intelligent debates. The stories told by John Jr. were noted and shared by his youngest brother, Joel, and later documented in a book written by Joel's son.
Frank Miles, one of John Jr.'s best friends, is reported to have been a very physically fit man, described to have been 6 feet 2 inches tall, weighing in at about 250 pounds of brawn, and able to perform impressive feats of strength. He was a pretty courageous man himself, and he didn't hesitate to brag that if he could ever get the entity in his grip, he would crush it. Unlike his friend John Jr., who knew it to be impossible to get a grip on the spirit, Miles made attempts at this feat frequently during his overnight stays at the Bell House. Frank would recall that on cold nights, all the blankets would be yanked off of the beds. If he managed to catch and hold on to them, they would end up being torn into pieces. On 2 occasions, the mattress was snatched from under Frank, and the bed would be rolled across the room by an unseen force. He attempted to unsuccessfully grab the offender, but when he would go after the spirit physically, he reported having felt the most forceful blows about his head and face he had ever felt. The spirit would laugh at him, stating he was sure a strong man it could knock the wind out of the air, but not dangerous in a tussle with a spirit. Frank Miles was always willing to offer his support to the Bells. These accounts are told by a grandson of John Bell Jr. by the name of Charles Bailey Bell in his book titled A Mysterious Spirit, The Bell Witch of Tennessee, in which he claims to have heard these accounts directly from Frank Miles.
Over time, the entity's voice grew stronger, and it could be heard quoting scripture and singing hymns, even addressing the family members by name. The witch seemed to take a strong interest in Betsy. She even went so far as to advise her in her personal life, warning her against marriage to her then-fiancé, Joshua Gardner. The spirit offered no specific words against Gardner, per se. She simply advised Betsy that she would have no happiness with him. I wasn't able to find any sources that said Gardner and the specter had any direct encounters. She simply did not approve of the match. Apparently, that was enough of a reason for Betsy to reluctantly call off the engagement. She feared that Kate's aversion to Joshua may lead him to the same fate as her father, for whom Kate also had a strong dislike. In the end, Joshua Gardner accepted this. He moved on to a new area of Tennessee, married another, fathered children, and served as a magistrate for a time. So at this point, John Bell, he's really, really sick, and that's what she's afraid of. So the witch really did seem to have a pretty direct effect on their lives, and they were pretty scared not to take her advice, right?
Unless she just didn't really want to marry him herself and didn't want to say it, so she used the witch as an excuse.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of leading toward, is that she was changing her mind. And we'll get into some details as to why. Ladies, put that idea on your Pinterest board if you have a hard breakup that you are facing and you need to take care of that. Let that fella down easy by telling him that you're afflicted by a witch who doesn't like him.
We should all just use that.
Yeah, I think they would go.
It was a witch.
They would be happy to go.
I'm doing this for you. It's not me, it's you. It's not you, it's the witch.
Yeah.
So the man Betsy did end up marrying was Richard Powell. He was a professor who had not only been her teacher, but had also been a friend to Joshua Gardner during his engagement to Betsy.
See? That's what I'm saying. I wonder if she didn't just like her fiancé's friend and needed an excuse to get out of it and not look like a total jerk.
But there are also other theories that we'll introduce later that are even more interesting.
Super convenient to blame a witch. I guess there are perks to everything. The glass is half full.
But also, during Betsy's engagement to Joshua Gardner, Powell was rumored to have pursued her with relentless flirtation.
So he's not good. He's not a good friend.
After Betsy finally ended the courtship, Powell frequently visited her and read her poetry, to help her get through her grieving.
Oh, good Lord. I feel like we can all see what's going on here, right? Scandal and deceit. That's what.
Scandal and deceit. Powell and Bell courted for about 3 years before they reunited in marriage in 1824. Following their reunion, Powell gave up his career in education to serve as a sheriff between 1830 and 1833. After this, he was elected to the House of Representatives. Powell's personal diary had been a source of research into the history of the families, but makes no mention of any kind related to the Bell Witch. It doesn't sound as though Powell ever witnessed any of Kate's shenanigans. It was rumored, however, that Powell dabbled in the occult. One account alleged that while visiting Powell's office, 2 men by the names of Calvin and John Johnson had glanced through a few books while waiting for Powell. Powell arrived and quickly closed one of the books that was open, stating that it was an old Latin book. Calvin, however, was well versed in Latin and stated that the writing in the book did not look at all like Latin. There were other stories involving Powell reciting what sounded to be like incantations in an unknown language. Powell did, however, have ciphering books, which could be misinterpreted by a person who didn't know what a ciphering book was or had never seen one. However, one could speculate on the convenience of the spirit's influence on the object of his lust to leave the person that stood in his way. Things that make you say,
Another interesting story involves a very famous visitor to the Bell estate. In 1819, Andrew Jackson is rumored to have paid a visit to the estate after hearing stories of the haunting. 3 of Bell's sons had served under General Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. It was said that his horse-drawn carriage became stuck as they approached the farm. A lot of time and effort was put into trying to advance the carriage onward to the farm, but to no avail. Jackson is said to have proclaimed, "By the Eternal, boys, it is the witch," to which a disembodied female voice replied, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight." And suddenly the wagon was set into motion. Jackson's plan for a week-long stay at the Bell farm was cut incredibly short after this experience, as well as other reported witch attacks throughout the night. Jackson's men were seen leaving the area the very next morning. Now, none of this story has ever been mentioned in any of Jackson's personal writings, so outside of third-party accounts, these events cannot be confirmed, nor has it been disproven. Cannot confirm nor deny. I would think... Meow. Meow. I would think that there'd be some other sort of historical record of an incident such as this, but alas, there is not. It seems to be the case in most materials that I researched that most people don't believe that this is a true story. First, because there was no record of it in Jackson's writings. But second, because the visit was said to have occurred while Jackson was president, which would lead one to believe that his experience was even more likely to be documented.
Getting back to the plight of old John Bell, who was the preliminary target of this seemingly sinister entity. Not only was he the target of her torture, in fact, Kate specified that her purpose and intent was to kill him for being a bad man. Ultimately, John Bell did die before his time. The cause of death was determined to be poisoning. Now, perhaps John's symptoms up to now could have been caused by a medical condition that's completely unrelated to this haunting. Many of his symptoms are associated with a disorder known as Bell's palsy. The name of the disorder, of course, is completely coincidental. Bell's palsy can be caused by viral infections such as Epstein-Barr, herpes virus, adenovirus, influenza B, hand, foot, and mouth, rubella, mumps, etc. But perhaps his symptoms were the result of being slowly poisoned to death. Metallic poisons such as mercury, lead, and arsenic derivatives were also capable of causing similar symptoms in small doses. Poison, of course, is notoriously a woman's murder weapon. Perhaps the weapon of an invisible witch, but perhaps someone else. We can only speculate, and speculate we shall.
You know we will.
We done did it.
Oh, Lord. The entity known as Kate seemed to be well-versed and educated in many subjects, including the Bible. Kate appeared to demonstrate knowledge of the past and the future of those who would come and interact with her. She was able to reveal her presence in 2 places at the same time. On top of her seemingly preternatural powers, she claimed to have caused the death of John Bell via poison. The art of poisoning has long been associated with witchcraft. Witches are typically portrayed as old hags with cauldrons for brewing up potions and poisons for spells. Atropa belladonna, aka deadly nightshade, this particular plant dates back to witch lore at least to the 9th century. Belladonna can cause tachycardia and is fatal if consumed by mouth. In small doses, however, it can cause hallucinations. Mandragora, or the mandrake plant, has a human-shaped root and was rumored to let out a shriek when it was pulled from the ground. The shriek, of course, was deadly to anyone who was present to hear it. Was it from Harry Potter?
Mandrake or mandragora.
Yeah. Another poison that causes hallucinations and is rumored to be used by witches is wormwood. And this, of course, is an ingredient used in making absinthe. Aside from hallucinations, used in large volumes, wormwood can cause seizures. The fly argic mushroom has been a favorite of Norse shamans in ancient times. This mushroom would be consumed by humans and reindeer alike. The urine of both was collected after consumption of the mushrooms to obtain the chemical compounds which had been filtered out by the body.
Just make sure the reindeer aren't radioactive.
We could come full circle. Back to radioactive reindeer.
You know I'm never gonna let it go. Radioactive reindeer. It's the best theory in any situation.
It's just so versatile.
Why do you think Rudolph's nose was red? Radioactive.
There's truth in the legends.
Anyway, so those are just a few of the herbs used by witches to cause their victims to see otherworldly visions and hallucinations. Perhaps, Danger, Will Robinson. Perhaps Kate Batts was managing to somehow poison the family, causing the hallucinations and possibly the health problem. However, without personal contact on a regular basis, this may have proven a difficult task for Kate. My theory is that Kate Batts was simply a convenient name to assume for the one who was truly responsible, since she was known to be angry with John Bell.
Yet another theory, which we mentioned earlier, poses the idea that perhaps this wasn't a witch at all. Demon mythology discusses cases in which demons assume identities, mimic voices, and torture people with similar methods as the Bell Witch. Could this have been a case of demonic oppression? Demonic oppression is one of the most commonly reported spiritual phenomena. While seemingly a religious man, John Bell was also rumored to be unfair and possibly crooked as a businessman. His lack of morality in some aspects of his life may have been enough to open himself and his family up to a demonic presence. Being cursed by another person can also be to blame for this type of experience. Many people would also disregard this possibility, presenting that historical cases of demonic possession or oppression were simply misunderstood medical afflictions.
But that's just not as fun, reasonable people. Perhaps not a demon, but a ghost or poltergeist was the cause of the abuse to John and his daughter. This, however, would not necessarily explain the strange animal sightings, but would explain the scratching sounds and noises whose origin cannot be found or explained, bumping sounds, objects moving from place to place unexplainably, and the feeling of being watched. These are classic signs of a possible haunting. Physical and emotional disorientation and effects on the mood or physical health can also be signs of a strong paranormal or preternatural presence in the home. Get that dang ghost Lysol.
Monster spray.
Be gone. I need a nap. I don't know.
I just pictured you spraying somebody in the face by accident. You scared me.
I'm sorry, I thought you was a ghost. I seen it.
I seen it with my own eyes. This is getting out of hand.
There are different classifications of hauntings. You can experience residual hauntings, which would be like the reenactment of a traumatic event over and over again. This type of haunting would have no sign of awareness or intelligence, so obviously the Bell Witch incident wouldn't really fit in here, because they were having conversations with her and she was giving them advice, so nah. The intentional haunting, which has more to do with a person having such a strong belief that they could manifest an entity. Lastly, and most disturbingly, the intelligent haunting. This is the one in which the spirit is capable of interacting with people and is said to have a personality of sorts. These are all very interesting possibilities to explore in the case of the Bell Witch.
USA Today published an article written by Nicole Young in October of 2015 which proposed yet another theory. This specific theory I find to be most disturbing of all. In this article, a woman by the name of Sarah Delaney Pugh, a clairvoyant who seems to know what truly happened in the Bell Witch case. According to this article, Pugh got the truth of the matter directly from Betsy Bell herself. Pugh's ability to see things that others could not began when she was 3 years old. Her vision terrified her, and she kept them secret for many years, sharing only with her parents. Pugh came to the Bell farm for an investigation with the paranormal group, which had been featured on A&E. Pugh proclaimed that it was the land on which they had settled and not the family that was cursed. The family did, however, ignite the curse when they disturbed the land for settlement. Pugh elaborated that it was, in fact, a slave who poisoned John Bell, causing his death. The reasoning behind this was that Betsy was being sexually abused by a male family member, the name of whom was not mentioned in the article, and that John was killed for failing to protect 11-year-old Betsy from the abuse. Without reading the entirety of the book in which the psychic's version of the tale is documented, one could draw several possible theories. Perhaps it was John himself who was doing the abusing, or at the very least perpetuating the abuse or sweeping it under the rug. I wonder if the abuse was being ignored since he was so highly regarded in the community, and he probably didn't want something like that to go out into the public, making him look bad. Once again, there's really no way to know.
The stories of people experiencing the Bell Witch continued long after the first generation of Bells were gone. According to the Tennessee Historical Society website in 1937, the witch was expected to return. Journalist T.H. Alexander was a skeptic but loved a good ghost story, so he resurrected the tale after Dr. Charles Bailey Bell had rekindled the public's interest in the case with his publication in 1934. During that year, people were reporting strange noises from the Bell Witch Cave, a mysteriously empty corn sack, scattered feathers from unknown chickens, and blackouts. Some locals outright claim it was the doing of the Bell Witch. There were travelers from surrounding areas coming to investigate the haunting cave, hoping to film the specter or gather some form of tangible proof that the ghost or witch exists. A group of teenagers reported having seen the witch during a weenie roast, but it sounds like that claim was largely discredited.
An article published in 1965 reported an incident in which a woman had visited the Bell Cemetery. While there, she heard a voice that told her to stand up and look around. You will find something of much value. According to the article, the woman then walked out into a field and found a black iron kettle that was upside down. When she turned the kettle over, she found a pearl buckle in the grass beneath it. It was reported that a jeweler estimated the buckle to be 160 to 200 years old and quite valuable.
In 1944, a girl named Bonnie Hainline was exploring the cave while playing hooky from English class. She reported that she'd borrowed a lantern from the cave owner. She said she and her friends had been exploring the cave for several years. On this particular day, her lantern blew out despite there being no breeze inside the cave. She said she was able to relight the lantern and it kept blowing back out. This terrified her so much that she crawled along the cave's water path in the dark until she got to the entrance. Once she got there, she found an open can of pork and beans and marshmallows. Later that evening, she was told that law enforcement had discovered 2 escaped fugitives in the back of the cave. Bonnie credited the witch with helping her avoid the fugitives.
Well, I hope this was a lesson to little Bonnie for skipping English class. Stay in school, kids. There is an appropriate time and place for witch hunting. In 1977, a group of soldiers visited the cave. If I recall the story, there were 5 of them. One of the soldiers apparently said something indicating that he was a skeptic. That soldier reported that something invisible then grabbed him, wrapping what felt like arms around his chest.
In 1986, a writer and a photographer, David Jarrett and Bill Wilson, were given permission to spend the night in the cave. While they were in the first cave room, they heard a noise coming from about 30 yards deeper in the cave. This noise was followed by a very loud and unwavering groan, accompanied by several loud thumps. When it began a third time, the men ran to the entrance. They did an in-depth investigation into the wiring of the lights, looking to see what caused the noises. They went back to the first room of the cave, but heard a rumble back towards the entrance, so they headed back that way, discovering that the rumble they heard was a noise from a jet. As they reached the entrance, however, a loud, high-pitched scream echoed from inside the cave. The men bolted and did not spend the night. So much for dedicated journalism.
The next year, the owner of a nearby gas station, a man named Sanders, reported a story that had occurred 20 years earlier. Sanders stated that one night he had run out of gas near the Red River across from the Bell Witch Cave. According to his story, when he began to walk toward town, a rabbit came out of the woods and started following him down the road. Sanders recalled walking faster, but the rabbit kept up with his pace, even when he started to sprint. After about a mile, Sanders reports that he sat down on a log trying to catch his breath, and the rabbit hopped up on the other side of the log. Sanders said that the rabbit looked at him and said, "Hell of a race we had there, wasn't it?"
Hell of an acid trip, huh? So does that make him the tortoise?
Was probably.
So Lucy Bell Butler is a direct descendant of John Bell Jr. and is named after John Bell's wife. The late Lucy Bell, if you recall, is one of the few people the witch is said to have held in high regard. According to a news article, Lucy says that the stories of the Bell Witch were part of her childhood, stating, "It was pretty interesting because things did happen and we would just naturally turn and say, 'Oh, the Bell Witch did that.'" She also says that she believes that their witch-related experiences extended far outside of the farm and the cave, but followed her family wherever they go. She said she and her daughter Jennifer have seen the 2-headed black dog in the original legend, and when Jennifer was growing up, they often saw a giggling girl running around their house at night. "I was thinking that might have been the Bell Witch. That would have been the sweet side of her," Butler said. "The little girl would play with Jennifer's toys, and the family dog was not afraid of her. She stayed, she would come out at night, and she was sweet and giggled." It is her belief that the Bell Witch was watching over her daughter.
So hearing all of these different accounts, what do you think is behind the mystery? The perception that witches have been responsible for hauntings by ghosts and poltergeists has been in play for centuries. Of course, the concept of vilifying witches has always been a thing. as religious zealots were never shy to accuse those who they disagree with or do not understand for any and all things negative in the world. It's possible that the witch, whether it was truly Kate Batts or not, could have been responsible for the events that took place in the Bell home directly by some form of magic. Perhaps she managed to give the illusion of a haunting by using a method of astral projection. We've talked about astral projection a few times throughout the episodes, but I'll go ahead and talk about it a second here. Astral projection is when a person leaves their physical body and travels in astral realms in the form of an astral body, double, or spirit replica of the physical body, according to the Encyclopedia of Witches and Witchcraft by Rosemary Ellen Guiley. In the case of a double or spirit replica, the double remains connected to the physical body via a type of astral cord, and is capable of passing through physical matter and travel at great speeds. Astral projection is a practice that you continue hearing about even in modern day. This was a skill that has been studied, tested, and utilized in recent history by governments for use as tactical warfare. The idea of this isn't just a scary myth based on a historical lack of education and understanding. I will not, however, discount the possibility or probability that many witch accounts of astral projection or out-of-body experiences likely were drug-induced in some cases.
Of course, there's also the possibility that witches have the ability to summon or invoke other supernatural entities, including ghosts or poltergeists, perhaps even demons or other nefarious creatures with the use of incantations or invocation. While the intention of this particular case may have been malicious, that's not to say that would be the case with all witches. The mantra behind modern neo-paganism and or Wicca is to do no harm. That does not mean that all modern witches accept or adhere to that idealism.
Some people just want to watch the world burn.
And then there are those who prefer to watch witches burn.
Things that make you go,
that went dark.
So putting aside the possibility of supernatural causes, there are a lot of skeptics who believe that it is possible that the whole Bell Witch tale was an elaborate hoax that just went too far. That it is merely a fable that grew and grew until it was too big to stop or confess the truth. How then would these experiences continue for so many years, or even affect so many people when it began? If it was a hoax, who was responsible for it, and how? Well, there are plenty of skeptics out there and plenty of theories to explore that front as well.
One such theory is that a man named Martin Ingram straight up invented the entire legend. Before his book in 1894, there was only a single mention in print that can be found referencing the Bell Witch, and that was in 1886. Now, Ingram's book was based entirely on the supposed handwritten diary of Richard Bell, who was one of the younger of John Bell's sons. As we mentioned previously, Richard was only about 6 when the hauntings began, and it would be more than 30 years before he recorded the events in his diary. Ingram's book wasn't released until 75 years after the hauntings were said to have taken place. The story goes that Richard gave the book to his son, who gave the book to Ingram. The sketchy part about it is that by this time, anyone who could either corroborate or deny any account in the book, either firsthand or secondhand, was dead. On top of that, the diary was never seen by anyone but Ingram. Why not? Is it possibly because it doesn't exist? There are obviously many different motives for fabricating such a story, the first of which, to sell books. To get in. What movie is that?
Michael, I invented the line.
Why? To get in. To sell books. People love a good ghost story. If they didn't, we'd be screwed. People love it even more if it's true. The 1886 mention of the witch, which can be found in a chapter about Robertson County in the book Goodspeed's History of Tennessee, was brief and made no mention of some of the most significant details in Ingram's version of the story, both the murder of John Bell, which was kind of a big deal, as well as the possibility that President Andrew Jackson may have experienced the Bell Witch himself. Of course, none of Jackson's writings mention this either, which I feel makes the story worthy of a certain amount of skepticism. We'll go ahead and read it, but you can decide what you think.
A remarkable occurrence which attracted widespread interest was connected with the family of John Bell, who settled near what is now Adams Station about 1804. So great was the excitement that people came from hundreds of miles around to witness the manifestations of what was popularly known as the Bell Witch. This witch was supposed to be some spiritual being having the voice and attributes of a woman. It was invisible to the eye, yet it would hold conversation and even shake hands with certain individuals. The freaks it performed were wonderful and seemingly designed to annoy the family. It would take the sugar from the bowls, spill the milk, take the quilts from the beds, slap and pinch the children, and then laugh at the discomfiture of its victims. At first it was supposed to be a good spirit, but its subsequent acts, together with the curses with which it supplemented its remark, proved the contrary.
One of the more interesting theories I stumbled upon was described in a book by Robert Bartholomew and Joe Nickell called American Hauntings, the true story behind Hollywood's scariest stories. One of the chapters details the existence of liars' clubs, which were apparently prevalent in rural America in that era for entertainment purposes, as they did not have TV or radio. The hoaxes and tall tales concocted by these liars' clubs were often corroborated by judges, preachers, prominent community members, and professors who would attest as witnesses to the events described in the tall tales. This would offer a valid explanation as to why Ingram's witness testimonies did not exist on record until the 1890s, and why, when the stories described droves of people visiting the area to investigate the tales, there are no actual records of these visitors, including President Andrew Jackson.
Other theories speculate that Betsy's husband, Richard Powell, was involved in the creation of the sensationalized horror story, possibly for reasons of profit, much like Ingram stood to profit from the books, perhaps even for entertainment or for notoriety. Powell had been married once before, but made little mention of it, and it wasn't really public knowledge, nor did he make public her death or the circumstances of it. As mentioned previously, Powell had been Betsy's professor, though his interest in her was quite obviously more extensive than that, in spite of his marriage to another, and in spite of the fact that Betsy was a child and he was 26. According to some Johnston family lore, John Bell nor James Johnston trusted Powell and believed him to be dishonest. Johnston was the man who the Bells first told of their affliction. The same accounts told by the Johnstons declares that it was John's feeling that Betsy would marry Powell over his dead body. So the speculation is that perhaps Powell was either in control of or was perhaps the witch. Let's look at this possibility in terms of evidence, circumstantial as it may be. There are no accounts of the witch ever manifesting around or interacting with Powell, nor was he ever known to speak about the witch, or events occurring at the Bell house. The witch took a strong interest in Betsy's personal life, even dissuaded her from a marriage to Josh Gardner, much to the benefit of her future consort. It has been said that the slaves of the Bell household suspected Powell of being responsible for the oppression of the Bell family. Perhaps this was the cause of the spirit's rage toward the slaves. There was later the matter of John Bell's death, in 1820, after which the specter seemed to have disappeared, as her stated goal had been accomplished. In the next year, 1821, Powell's wife died, and the witch reappeared to Betsy at a party in which she attended with Josh, after which she ended her engagement. She was then pursued by Powell until their marriage in 1824. It all sounds very suspicious, don't you think?
Betsy herself had also been accused of fabricating her own experiences, perhaps as a form of collective hysteria. Her father's experience induced by poison could have caused him to become ill and hallucinate, and poor Betsy just fell into the drama of it all, not understanding or being able to separate reality from fantasy, perhaps even as a way for her young mind to cope with the sexual abuse she was experiencing, if we are to believe the earlier mentioned psychic, perhaps speculated by many at the hands of her own father. From there, the hysteria could have spread through the family and friends like wildfire, accusing any experience, paranormal or not, to be the work of the mysterious and terrifying invisible witch. Another possibility is that John is simply tortured by the guilt of assaulting his daughter. Perhaps Betsy's injuries at the hand of the witch were inflicted by her molester, or self-inflicted as a result of self-torture because of the assault. Following this theory, one could speculate that John may have even poisoned himself out of guilt.
Perhaps the reason Lucy was unaffected by the haunting was that she was the cause of it. Lucy being John Bell's wife, keep in mind. How many cases of husbands being poisoned by wives exist throughout history? It is a very real possibility. Perhaps she too was aware of Betsy's abuse and sought to end it. Perhaps there was no abuse at all, and he was just a bad man, and he was accused of being in some bad business dealings. Perhaps she encouraged the idea of the ghost or witch because it took the focus away from the true cause of John's suffering and gave her a scapegoat.
Kate Batts, the most popular theory related to the ghost's true identity, didn't die until 1843, although there are rumors that the haunting had begun after her death.
Many researchers argue ardently that the lack of substantiated proof and the questionable and dubious sources allude to the fact that the Bell Witch haunting is simply an over-embellished folktale. Author Joe Nichols' writing made note that many of the people who knew Betsy Bell well took her tales with a grain of salt. Nichols suggests the possibility that this is a case of poltergeist faking syndrome. I didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't either.
Poltergeist faking syndrome, or a situation in which a person creates a seemingly paranormal phenomena or disturbance, typically a child.
So after reading his articles, though, I tried to research that as a syndrome. I think that he coined the term, and I didn't find really where anyone else had used it. So this is just him.
Stop trying to make fetch happen.
It's not going... actually, this could happen.
Well, it does.
It's clearly a thing.
Yeah, but it just didn't stick as a syndrome. But how, then, could the voices of others be imitated so accurately as described in these tales? Like the sermons of Port and Gunn, which took place in 2 different churches in 2 different counties at the exact same time. How could anyone manage to create any of these strange occurrences, including the strange animals and physical abuse by unseen forces, or voices coming from nowhere with information about people's private thoughts? How is this possible without some sort of supernatural power behind it?
Was this all a case of mass hysteria? John reported seeing something strange and began having symptoms related to illness or by possible poisoning, and everyone else just fed off the fear and chaos, either making up stories of their own or actually believing that they were seeing things that they weren't. There are a lot of elements that can cause a person to question all accounts and theories. What are your theories on this subject? Let us know. Comment directly on the episode on your podcast platform, send us a PM, or write on our Facebook wall. Send a direct message on Instagram, or send an email. However you prefer, let us know.
I think there's just a witch. I think all these reasonable theories just suck the fun out of everything, and I'm sick of it.
I tend to lean towards the wife poisoning him because of the molestation theory.
Yeah, but who knows about that psychic?
Who knows? Anyway,
thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast. We appreciate you listening and especially your feedback. Hop on over to iTunes and give us a rating and a review, or whichever platform you listen from. If you're a new listener, make sure you hit that subscribe button and look for our social media updates for events that we may be attending. But most importantly, look for new episodes every Monday. Once again, thanks for listening.
Bigfoot, Bigfoot, Bigfoot for breakfast. Are we eating him? Did we invite him over? Nobody knows. Oh, boy.